I'm going to tell you something that still keeps me awake, even when the sun is shining. Something that rewired the way I understand fear, responsibility, and what it means to face the ghosts we create in life. But before I take you inside that laundromat in Illinois, before the rules, before the blood, before the moment I watched something impossible crawl into my reality, I want you to sit with this single truth. At 2:17 a.m. on my third night working the graveyard shift, a washing machine started running on its own. It filled itself with water. It churned like someone inside it was fighting to get out. And when I finally got close enough to see what was tumbling behind the glass, I saw clothes soaked in blood that hadn't been there seconds earlier, and someone or something pushing its sleeves toward the door as if begging me to open it. That night wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment I realized I should have listened to the rules, the moment when every hair on my arms stood straight and my mind whispered the same question again and again. What if this job was never meant for the living? If stories like this make your pulse quicken, or if you want more true night shift horrors just like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you what others are too afraid to talk about. I needed that job. That's how this whole mess started. Not wanted, needed. The kind of need that crawls up the back of your throat when you're counting the dollars in your bank account and realizing it wouldn't stretch through the week. The kind of need that makes you sign your name on a clipboard you should have burned, accept a schedule no one else wanted, and step into a building whose walls held secrets heavier than anything you've carried in your life. My name is Aaron, 27 years old, Illinois native, son of a woman who raised me alone and father I barely remember. I had been a student at a technical school trying to build a future around engines and carburetors, believing that if I could just get the right degree, maybe I could build something better for myself. But debt climbs fast, and dreams collapse faster. After 2 semesters, I dropped out. My decision, my consequences, bills stacked like bricks, and the world didn't care what dreams I had left. So when I saw the 24-hour laundromat on Meadowbrook Avenue was hiring for overnight shifts, same-day training, cash advances available, I walked in before I had time to talk myself out of it. The place was called Lumen Laundry. Ironic, considering how dark everything would soon become. Its neon sign buzzed overhead like a dying firefly. Inside, the space felt stuck in the 90s. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of industrial washers and dryers, the kind built like steel sculptures, heavy and humming with tired machinery that had seen decades of late-night customers. The air smelled faintly of detergent and something older underneath, something stale, something like wet metal. Behind the counter stood the woman who would become my manager. Her name was Marlene Doyle. Mid-40s, practical shoes, eyes that held that quiet, resigned strength you see in people who've worked the same job for too many years. She didn't smile when I introduced myself, just nodded like she'd been expecting me. "You're Aaron," she said. "You're here for the night shift." Not a question, a fact. She handed me a dark blue polo with Lumen Laundry stitched into the fabric and a name tag she'd written in permanent marker. The wind outside rattled the windows as if the building itself was warning me to go home. "Simple job," she told me. "You help customers, clean what needs cleaning, keep an eye on the machines, and you lock up at 6 a.m. That's it." I remember thinking her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd said it 1,000 times, and each time it cost her a piece of something she couldn't spare. Then she slid a laminated card across the counter toward me. White background, black text. 6 rules typed in plain, emotionless Arial font. Read these. Follow them exactly, no exceptions. That's what the card said at the top. I chuckled at first because rules at a laundromat? What could possibly require that level of seriousness? But Marlene didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. So I glanced down. 1. Never open any washing machine that starts itself. If you didn't see someone load it, leave it alone. 2. If you hear noises coming from the storage room between 2 and 4 a.m., you didn't. Ignore them. 3. Don't use the employee restroom after midnight. 4. If the lights flicker 3 times in a row, stand perfectly still for a count of 30. 5. Do not approach washer number 8 if the door is open and clothes are visible inside but no customer is present. 6. If anyone asks about previous night shift workers, tell them you're new and you don't know anything. I looked up at her then, waiting for some explanation, some joke, some sign that this was just one of those weird, small-town, superstitious things places like this sometimes had. But Marlene looked tired in a way that went deeper than long hours. There were lines around her mouth that told me she'd lost more than sleep in this building. These rules are for your safety, she said quietly. Nothing more. I'm not proud of what I thought then. I thought she was dramatic, odd, maybe overprotective, but I needed the job too much to care. I shoved the card into my pocket and promised myself I'd read it again later. That first night, nothing horrible happened. Strange, yes, but nothing that made me rethink this job. Just a few customers, night shift nurses, college students who waited too long to do laundry, a trucker who washed his entire life in 2 loads. Nothing unexpected in a place like this, but even then, before anything supernatural made itself known, I felt something off, not danger, not malice, more like grief, like the building itself was mourning something it couldn't forget. Every corner felt like it held a story. Every machine hummed with a tone that felt too human to ignore. And the silence between customers wasn't silence at all, more like a held breath, like the place was waiting for something. The first small warning came around 2 a.m. The lights flickered 3 times, rapid, sharp, like someone flicked the switch intentionally. I froze. Remembered Rule 4, count to 30. I did it, not because I believed anything would happen if I didn't, but because the rule card had burrowed into my thoughts like an itch. When I finally moved again, I noticed the air felt different, thicker somehow, charged, but nothing else happened. I finished my shift without incident. The second night, something shifted. At around 1:40 a.m., right after a pair of teenagers left the building laughing about something meaningless and forgettable, I felt a chill touch the back of my neck. Not a draft. Something deliberate, something that made the hairs stand up one by one. When I turned, every washer door was closed except for washer number 8. The machine sat perfectly still, empty, door open like a mouth. I ignored it, telling myself someone must have left it open. But as I walked past it, I swear I heard something faint from inside the drum, like fabric shifting even though there were no clothes inside. I chalked it up to nerves, exhaustion, overthinking. The third night shattered all those rational explanations. I remember checking the machines in my usual routine, counting them as I walked by. 1 through 8. The neon outside flickered. The hum of dryers created that hypnotic white noise that could almost lull someone into forgetting where they were. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, the sound came, a metallic click, followed by a low gurgle. Washer number 8 turned on. I froze mid-step, The machine filled itself with water, sloshing against the glass as if an invisible hand had shoved clothes inside. But I'd checked that washer minutes earlier, empty, door open, no customers in sight. The overhead lights buzzed louder, like they were straining under the weight of something in the air. And I felt it again, that pressure, that thick energy, as if the room's temperature dropped without the thermostat realizing it. I approached the machine slowly, drawn by something I couldn't describe. The water was dark, murky, not gray, not dirty, but red. A deep, pulsing red that turned the rotating drum into something that looked disturbingly alive. Then I saw it, a sleeve, not fabric floating randomly but reaching, flattening against the glass, pushing outward like someone was inside the shirt, trapped, struggling. I remember whispering, "No, no, no, no." Another push, harder. The sleeve's cuff smacked the glass loud enough to echo through the laundromat. I stumbled backward. My heartbeat crashed against my ribs. My breathing turned shallow. Every instinct told me to run, to get as far from that machine as I could. But something about the motion inside the drum, something about the desperation in the movement, rooted me in place. I didn't know then what I was looking at. I didn't know what the building held, what had happened here long before the laundromat opened. I didn't know that the stains weren't stains, that the blood wasn't the beginning of the haunting, but the residue of something that had never stopped. I just knew I was watching a washing machine cycle through something impossible, and I knew the rules were real, because only one thought filled my mind as that sleeve reached out again, a silent plea, a wordless scream. Don't open it. For the first time since I took the job, fear didn't feel like imagination. It felt like instruction, like someone or something wanted to keep me alive long enough to understand what was coming next. When the cycle finally stopped, the water drained. The drum fell still. No clothes inside, no blood, just an empty washer, cold and quiet, as if nothing had happened. Something changed that night. In me, in the building, in whatever presence lingered between the walls. The rules no longer felt like guidelines. They felt like a warning I had ignored for too long. But the strangest part wasn't the machine turning on by itself, or the blood, or the reaching sleeve. The strangest part was what came after, when the laundromat fell completely silent, because in that silence, with the machines still cooling and the buzz of the neon sign outside barely audible, I heard something I will never forget. Someone whispered my name, not loud, not close, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. Clear enough that the rules suddenly felt like the only thing standing between me and something that had been waiting far longer than I had been alive. And that was just the beginning. More was coming, much more. But before I tell you how the rules became a map for survival, why the storage room door rattled every night at 3 a.m., and what finally appeared in the bathroom mirror. If you're still here, still listening, still curious about what happened inside that laundromat, I need you to subscribe to the channel. It's the only way I know these stories matter, and trust me, the rest of this one is something you'll want to hear, because what happened next was the moment I realized this job wasn't just dangerous, it was haunted, and I was already in far too deep to walk away. The night after the washing machine first came alive by itself, I showed up for my shift at Lumen Laundry with a feeling lodged under my ribs, like a stone I couldn't shake loose. Every instinct told me not to walk through those glass doors again, but instinct wasn't something I could afford to follow. Rent doesn't wait for your nerves to settle. Bills don't disappear just because you're afraid of what happens at 2 in the morning. Marlene wasn't there when I arrived. She usually hung around until midnight, but that night the place was empty when I stepped inside. Only the buzz of the fluorescent lights greeted me, humming in that same strange frequency they had the night before, the kind that vibrates against your eardrums like a warning. I stood there for a moment, just letting the door shut gently behind me, swallowing the sudden rush of cold air that briefly followed me in. The laundromat seemed quieter than usual, almost still, like the whole building was holding a breath that wasn't meant for me. I took 2 steps in and felt it immediately, that heaviness again. Not fear, not exactly, but something close to grief mixed with curiosity, like the air was thick with unanswered questions. The lights flickered once, just once, enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. I waited to see if they'd flicker again, but they didn't, just stayed steady, humming their insect-like drone. I punched in on the small time clock next to the bulletin board. At some point, I had expected a note from Marlene, maybe instructions, maybe a follow-up about the previous night. But the board was as empty as ever, just a faded poster reminding people not to overload the machines, and an outdated calendar from the year before. No Marlene, no comments, nothing that acknowledged the chaos I had seen behind the glass of washer number 8. I set down my backpack behind the counter and took out the laminated card she'd given me on my first day. The rules felt heavier in my hands now. Before that night, they'd seemed ridiculous. Now each one felt like a flashing red sign I should have taken more seriously. Never open any washing machine that starts itself. If you hear noises in the storage room between 2 and 4 a.m., you didn't. Don't use the employee restroom after midnight. If the lights flicker 3 times, stand still and count to 30. Don't approach washer number 8 if the door is open. Don't talk about former employees. Every line carried a weight now. Every instruction felt like a line I shouldn't cross, like a boundary someone set long before I stepped into this place. Someone who'd learned the consequences the hard way. By 12:30, a few customers trickled in. A woman in her late 50s who hummed gospel hymns while folding her towels. A young guy in scrubs, eyes half shut from his shift at the hospital. A pair of brothers arguing about whether they could wash their shoes in the machines. I warned them not to. They ignored me for 5 minutes, then realized I wasn't going to budge and gave up. Normal things, human things, ordinary in every way, except how much the normalcy made me feel more on edge. I kept noticing things I hadn't before, the way the vents rattled even though the air wasn't blowing, the way the floor creaked as if someone invisible was pacing in the back hallway, the faint, warm scent of bleach that drifted through the building, even though I hadn't used any that night. Around 1:30, the last of the customers left. I walked my usual circuit around the laundromat, checking for stray socks, wiping lint from the dryers, pushing down the edges of trash bags until they sat flush in their bins. It felt like a ritual now. The daily tasks of someone pretending the world around him was ordinary. I paused near washer number 8 and checked that it was empty. The door hung open, harmless, like any machine at rest. I could see the drum clearly, stainless steel, cold, motionless, perfectly clean. It was hard to believe that less than 24 hours earlier, blood had been swirling behind that glass like someone was washing away a crime scene. I swallowed hard and backed away. The clock read 1:52, close enough to the time I'd started to dread. The entire building seemed to know what was coming. The lights dimmed a fraction, like the electricity in the walls was dipping for a moment. The air turned noticeably colder. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. At 2:10, I stopped pretending to work. I sat behind the front counter, watching the rows of machines, like something might burst out of them. Every sound, every metallic thud, every whir of a dryer cooling off, every tiny shift of the floor felt amplified. At 2:17, the building exhaled. The sound was a low, mechanical groan, like someone turning a rusted valve that hadn't been touched in years. The familiar click and whir of a machine turning on. I stood up. Something in me wanted to run out the door, but another part, the part that needed answers, held me there like gravity. Washer number 8 had turned on again. Water began to pour in. My throat tightened. The water looked normal at first, clear and harmless. But then the drum began to turn and the water darkened. The red returned. The movement inside the machine was more frantic this time. The sleeves of the shirt were slamming into the glass, harder than before, like someone inside was panicking, trapped and suffocating. A sleeve slid across the glass as if it were dragging fingers down it. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me, but no one was there. The laundromat was empty. The lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. Rule 4, count to 30. My breath caught. The rules had been right before. There was no reason to think they wouldn't matter now. I forced myself to stand still. 1, 2, 3. At 15, the air felt thicker. At 23, the temperature dropped so sharply I could see my breath. Something moved behind me. I felt it. But I didn't dare turn my head until I reached 30. When I finally spun around, the air was still. Nothing moved. No shadows out of place. No figure behind me. I turned back to the washing machine. The sleeves weren't reaching anymore. They were pressed flat against the glass like hands, as if someone inside the garment had placed their palms there, begging for help. I wasn't imagining it. I knew I wasn't. The desperation in the motion felt too human to be random, too deliberate. It was the movement of someone trying to escape. Then a flash of something bright hit the corner of my eye. A reflection in the glass of the machine next to number 8. Something shifted in the reflection. Something tall. Something that hadn't been standing there before. I turned, expecting to see a person. Nothing. The room was empty, but the reflection had been unmistakably shaped like a man. My heart pounded. I stepped back and grabbed the counter like I needed to anchor myself to something real. The clothes inside washer 8 twisted violently now, jerking against the current of the swirling water. The red water foamed and churned until the drum rattled against its hinges. Then everything stopped. The water drained, the clothes vanished, and the machine fell silent. I didn't breathe for several seconds, didn't blink, didn't move. The building creaked again, and I realized something was different this time. The noise didn't come from the machines or the vents. It came from the back hallway, the storage room. Between 2 and 4 a.m., ignore it, that rule again, the one that seemed almost paranoid. But now I could hear it, footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, something pacing back and forth behind the storage room door, like a man trapped in a small space with nowhere to go. The pacing went on steadily, a rhythm that felt too measured to be an accident. 3 steps, stop, 3 steps back, stop. Then came the sound I hadn't expected, the wet wringing of fabric, the kind of sound you hear when someone strangles the water from a drenched towel, twisting it tightly in their hands. A soft slosh followed by the drip of water hitting the floor. I backed away instinctively, my hand covering my mouth as if the sound might slip into my lungs. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it against my ribs. I didn't realize my knees were shaking until I felt the counter behind me. Don't investigate. Don't open the door. I didn't plan to. I pressed myself against the counter and waited, counting the seconds, hoping the sound would fade. But it didn't. It grew louder, closer, more urgent. The pacing became uneven, almost nervous. The ringing sound turned into something more agitated, like someone was twisting the fabric too violently, too desperately. The lights flickered again, but only twice this time. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to steady my breathing. Stop listening, I told myself. Stop imagining things. But the sounds weren't imagination. They were real. And worse than that, they felt personal, like whoever or whatever was in that storage room was calling out to me. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, maybe minutes, maybe seconds. Time didn't feel real anymore. When the footsteps finally stopped, the silence that followed was almost louder than the noise had been. I forced myself to check my watch. It read 3:04 a.m. The rule said the sounds would happen between 2 and 4, right on schedule, like everything here followed some pattern I hadn't uncovered yet. When the atmosphere finally softened and the air lost that strange heaviness, I moved again. My legs felt unsteady, like they had forgotten how to support me. I walked slowly toward the counter and started cleaning just for something to do, something to ground me. I wiped down the folding tables even though they were spotless. I straightened the detergent bottles on the shelves even though no one had touched them. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. At 5:30 a.m., the first of the morning customers arrived, a young mother carrying a laundry basket and an infant in a carrier, the faint smell of baby powder trailing behind her. She smiled at me like everything was normal, and maybe for her it was. Maybe for everyone else in the world, this laundromat was just another place to wash clothes and fold blankets. Maybe it was only me who felt the pressure of the past pressing against the walls. When I locked the doors at 6 and stepped outside, the sunrise felt like mercy. The sky was a pale yellow, soft and safe. The world felt real again, but something in me had shifted permanently. I stopped at the diner on the corner for a cup of coffee, even though I barely drank it. I needed something warm in my hands. Something normal. The waitress poured me a mug without asking, her bracelets jingling lightly. "You look like someone who's had a long night," she said. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just nodded. She didn't know how long the night had been. She didn't know how long it would continue to be. The next night, I showed up earlier than usual. I told myself it was because I needed the money. But the truth was darker. I needed answers. I needed to know if the washer would start again, if the footsteps were real, if the grief in the walls could be explained. I needed to feel like I had some control over what was happening. When I arrived, Marlene was behind the counter with her arms crossed, looking smaller than usual. Her face was drawn tight, her mouth pressed into a line that looked like it had been carved there. "You saw something," she said. It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth, but she held up a hand. Her expression softened just barely, like she wished she didn't have to hear the details. "You don't have to tell me what it was," she said. "I know. You're still here, which means you followed the rules. That's good. That's the only reason you're standing in front of me right now." I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but something inside me held back. Something about her eyes told me she wasn't ready to give me answers yet, or worse, that she knew too much and feared what would happen if she said it out loud. She reached under the counter and slid something toward me. Another laminated card, same rules, but this time a new line had been added at the bottom. Rule 7, do not attempt to help the presence. My throat tightened as I read it. Presence. She had a name for it, a word for whatever was trapped inside this building. "Why can't I help it?" I asked quietly. Her expression flickered. Fear, regret, something deeper. "Because it doesn't want help," she whispered. "It wants to repeat." Repeat what? I didn't ask. Not yet. But the question clawed its way into my mind and sat there, cold and heavy. That night I walked my usual circuit again. The machines hummed their mechanical lullaby. The vents rattled. The building's bones groaned softly as the temperature dipped. But everything felt sharper now, more aware, like the presence Marlene referred to could feel me there. At 1:50, the lights flickered once. My heart raced. At 2, the storage room creaked. At 2:17, washer number 8 started again. This time I walked toward it, not out of bravery, but out of necessity. I needed to see. I needed to understand. The water darkened faster than before, spiraling upward like someone was stirring it from beneath. The shirt inside slammed against the glass harder than ever, the movement violent, frantic. Then something new happened. The shirt pressed against the glass and stayed there. A shape formed beneath the wet fabric, a faint outline of a face, nose, mouth, jaw. Someone was pushing from inside, someone who had been washing the same blood for years, someone who had never left this building, someone who wanted to be seen. And I was starting to see everything. When the cycle ended, the clothes weren't gone this time. They were there, soaked, limp, tangled in the bottom of the drum. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. The clothes shifted on their own. And a hand rose from beneath them. That was the moment I realized the rules weren't meant to protect me from a machine. They were meant to protect me from a man who refused to leave. And whatever story he carried was only beginning to show itself. The hand rising from beneath the clothes in washer 8 didn't look solid. It wasn't pale like a corpse or bloody like something torn apart. It was worse. It looked translucent, as if whatever was reaching upward belonged halfway to this world and halfway trapped in a place no living person should ever see. The fingers curled in one slow, trembling motion before collapsing back into the wet fabric like the hand had never existed. I stumbled backward, one hand gripping the side of a dryer, just to keep myself from falling. My heart pounded so violently I could hear my pulse in my ears. For a long moment, the laundromat was silent except for the faint dripping sound inside the drum. It was only after several seconds passed that it occurred to me that dripping didn't make sense inside a sealed machine. A cold wave washed over me, and the sudden urge to run nearly overwhelmed me. But something else stopped me. Not fear. Curiosity. A pull that felt unnatural, as if the building itself wanted to show me something. I stepped closer to the machine again. Inside, the clothes lay motionless now, ordinary, soaked, heavy. But the sight of that hand still lingered in my mind, burned there like an after-image from staring at a bright light too long. I had no explanation, no rational framework left. I only knew one thing. Whatever lived within these walls wasn't done with me. A soft sound broke the silence. At first it was faint, almost like someone dragging the tip of their nail across a table. Then it grew louder, deliberate, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the glass window of washer 8. I jerked back again, adrenaline surging through my body. The tapping continued, steady, unhurried, as if trying to get my attention. When I forced myself to lean in, my reflection stared back at me in the curved glass. Wide eyes, pale face, breath fogging the surface. But behind my reflection, another shape seemed to be forming, something darker, something leaning forward. Then the tapping stopped. Just silence again. Silence thick enough to hear the hum of electricity in the walls. I stood there frozen until the overhead lights flickered once. The machines hummed as they cooled. The vents rattled faintly. The world tried to pretend nothing unusual had happened. But my body knew better. I backed away from the washer, careful not to take my eyes off it. As I moved toward the counter, I pressed my hands against the laminate surface, trying to steady myself, trying to convince my brain not to spiral into the kind of terror that left people unable to move. Then it hit me. The rule card. Rule 7. Do not attempt to help the presence. Had I just taken a step toward helping it? Was acknowledging what I had seen already a violation? The thought gnawed at me, because everything I had experienced so far, the blood, the sleeves reaching, the hand, felt like the presence was getting stronger, more aware of me, more desperate. At 2:43 a.m., the footsteps began, the same rhythmic pacing I'd heard the night before, but louder this time, closer, as if whoever walked behind that storage room door was agitated, waiting for something. The pacing continued for several minutes, punctuated by the wet, sickening sound of fabric being wrung out by invisible hands. I couldn't bring myself to move. My feet felt glued to the floor. Someone could have screamed my name, and I don't think I could have turned away from the sound coming from that hallway. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. A brief, unnatural silence hung in the air. Then something scraped across the floor inside the storage room. Something heavy, something that sounded a lot like a body being dragged. My breath caught. The hairs on my arms rose like bristles. Then the doorknob rattled, just once, sharp, violent, like someone had grabbed it and twisted hard, testing it, trying to wrench it loose. I staggered backward, knocking into a trash bin. The lid clattered to the floor. The noise echoed far too loudly in the stillness, and for a moment I thought the thing inside the storage room would use it as an invitation to push through. But the doorknob didn't move again. The building sank back into that unsettling silence. I waited there, trembling, for what felt like an eternity. At 3:06 a.m., the storage room was quiet again. I needed answers, real ones, not cryptic warnings, not rules meant to keep me alive but never explain why. I needed to understand what was happening, why I kept seeing things no one should see, and why the presence seemed to be growing stronger each night. When my shift ended at 6, I walked outside into the blinding morning light, my thoughts a tangled mess. Instead of heading home, I got into my car and drove toward the Riverside Branch Library. I didn't know exactly what I hoped to find, but I knew I couldn't keep walking blind through whatever nightmare the laundromat had become. The library sat in an old stone building, its tall windows filled with the warm glow of early morning sunshine. It looked peaceful, safe, a place built for answers. I parked, stepped out, and walked up the stairs. Inside, the faint smell of old paper and dust wrapped around me like a blanket. A quiet murmur of rustling pages and distant footsteps drifted through the aisles. I approached the front desk, where a woman in her mid-50s sat typing, her soft blonde hair pinned neatly behind her head. Her name tag read, Elaine Manning. She glanced up at me over her glasses. "Can I help you find something?" My throat felt tight, like the words wanted to hide inside me, but I forced them out. "I'm looking for information about a motel that used to be on Meadowbrook Avenue," I said, "before the laundromat was built there." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Recognition. Hesitation. Something else. "Ah," she said softly, "the Meadowbrook Motel, that's a very old case. A case? I asked, trying to sound casual. She sighed and motioned for me to follow her behind the desk to a section labeled Local History and Archives. The shelves were filled with records, newspapers, microfilm reels, and bound volumes of old reports. She led me to a desk with a microfilm reader. There were incidents, she said. People still talk about them sometimes, not openly. What kind of incidents? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. You're not researching this for fun, are you? No, I said quietly. I'm working at the laundromat, and I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. And you've seen things, she finished for me. My breath stopped. She knew. Somehow she knew. Let's start with the newspaper archives, she said, loading the microfilm reel. Everything after the motel closed is rumor and superstition. But the facts, those we still have. The screen flickered to life in front of me. Old newspaper pages scrolled past, local events, classifieds, weather reports. And then I found it. The headline, Tragedy Strikes Meadowbrook Motel. Family found dead in room 12. My stomach twisted. A family. The article was dated from the 1990s. It described a horrifying scene. 4 people dead. A suspected murder-suicide committed by the father, whose mind, according to detectives, had reached a state of irreversible psychological collapse. The wife and 2 children were found with stab wounds. The father was found hanging in the laundry facility of the motel, having hanged himself with extension cords after repeatedly trying to wash the blood from his clothes. My hand shook as I scanned the text. The laundry room, the very place where Washer 8 now sat. Then I found something worse. The article mentioned that investigators had noticed the washing machines had been run over a dozen times during the night. The same load of clothing washed again and again, even though the stains never came out. The same stains that now appeared inside my machine. My heart felt like someone was squeezing it. I swallowed hard and kept reading. One line caught my eye. The father was reported to have been heard pacing and wringing out clothing, according to the night staff on duty before the incident was discovered. My mouth went dry. Pacing, wringing, the sounds I'd heard in the storage room. I sat there staring at the scene described in the article, but my mind drifted back to the laundromat, to the footsteps behind the door, to the wringing of soaked fabric, to the presence that wouldn't leave. What happened after that? I asked Elaine quietly. She raised her eyebrows. You mean after the motel closed? Yes. Well, she took a breath. They tore the motel down, built the laundromat right over the laundry facility. Same foundation, same footprint. A chill spread across my spine. The building itself was holding the memory of what had happened there. Some people say, she continued, lowering her voice, that the father never moved on, that he's stuck in some kind of loop, that he's repeating the same actions night after night, trying to wash away something he can't get rid of. The blood, I whispered. She nodded. That's why the machines used to malfunction, she said. The early staff reported strange incidents, but they never put them in writing. They didn't want to scare people. I sat there in silence for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing inside me since the moment I first saw that hand. Did anyone ever try helping him? Elaine's eyes darkened. Some did, she said. None stayed in the job long, and some didn't make it out. A cold wave of dread washed over me. What happened to them? She shook her head. It's not my place to say, but your manager knows. If she hasn't told you yet, she will. I stared at the microfilm screen again, at the haunting facts burned into the grainy black and white text. I thought about the rules, the pacing, the blood, the reaching sleeves, the hand. And it hit me like a blow to the chest. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to show me something. But that idea was dangerously close to breaking Rule 7. Do not attempt to help the presence. It didn't matter. Curiosity burrowed deep into me. A strange mix of fear and empathy tightened around my ribs. That presence, the father, whoever he had been, felt more tragic than monstrous, lost rather than malicious, tormented rather than cruel. But I had seen his hand, and something told me he had seen me, too. When I returned to Lumen Laundry that night, the air inside felt different, heavy, expectant, like the presence was waiting for me. I stepped behind the counter, placed my belongings down, and forced myself to breathe evenly. The card with the rules brushed against my leg inside my pocket. I pulled it out and stared at Rule 7 again. Do not attempt to help the presence. I wanted to rip the card in half, but something instinctual stopped me. Following the rules had kept me alive so far. Breaking them could be fatal. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then they went steady again. I exhaled shakily and walked toward the machines, beginning my routine circuit. As I approached washer 8, something made me stop dead in my tracks. The machine door was open, and sitting inside the drum, neatly folded, was a shirt I hadn't seen before, clean, dry, stark white. Staring at it made anxiety twist tight in my chest. Then I noticed something else. A piece of paper sat on the folding counter directly behind me. A scrap torn from a notepad. I picked it up. Words were scrawled across it in handwriting that trembled. I need you to see what I see. My throat tightened. I spun around, scanning the laundromat for anyone who might have left the note. But I was alone. The temperature dipped again. Somewhere behind the dryers, something shifted. I stepped closer to washer 8. The clean shirt inside lay still. Too still. I leaned forward, hesitant, but needing to know if the shirt would move again. Then the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the laundromat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The sound came next. A whisper so close to my ear that I could feel the cold breath behind the words. Please. The lights flickered back on. Every washer door in the laundromat was wide open, except washer 8. Its door had shut. Inside it, the white shirt was gone, and a trail of wet footprints led from the machine to the storage room door. Footprints that hadn't existed a moment earlier, footprints that stopped right at the door, footprints that belonged to someone who hadn't walked this earth in decades. I stared at the prints, my breath shallow, my heart struggling to find a steady rhythm. The presence wasn't just repeating anymore. It was reaching out, not maliciously, not angrily, but desperately. And I knew, deep down in that primal place where truth lives even when logic dies, that this was only the beginning of what he wanted to show me. I didn't want to move, not toward the footprints, not toward the storage room door, not toward anything that might pull me deeper into the jaws of whatever haunted Lumen Laundry. But fear has a way of paralyzing and propelling you at the same time. It locks your legs in place while drawing your eyes toward the thing you least want to see. The wet footprints began directly in front of washer 8, each one forming a dark, glistening print against the floor. They were bare feet, not shoes. Each print was narrow, defined. Toes splayed slightly outward just like the ones in the crime scene photos I'd forced myself not to imagine. They tracked a straight path toward the storage room, and though I didn't want to get closer, something in me recognized that he Whatever remained of the man from the motel wasn't trying to lure me blindly. This wasn't a predator stalking prey. This felt more like a man wandering endlessly through a nightmare, reaching for whatever scraps of help he thought he could find. Still, I didn't follow the prints. Rule or no rule, that storage room door could very well be the threshold between life and the kind of death no one deserved. Instead, I slowly backed toward the counter, keeping my eyes fixed on the trail until the cold, laminate edge pressed against my palms. The lights flickered again, not the frantic flutter from before, but a soft dimming, as if the building was sighing under the weight of something unseen. I grabbed the phone under the counter and dialed Marlene's number with shaking fingers. I didn't know what I planned to say. What do I do? How do I survive this? Why didn't you tell me everything? But when her voice answered on the second ring, the words nearly died in my throat. You're seeing it, aren't you? She said quietly. No greeting, no surprise, only inevitability. How did you... My voice cracked. You wouldn't have called unless things had escalated, she replied. You shouldn't have gone near the washer when it turned on, and you sure as hell shouldn't be standing near that hallway right now. I swallowed hard, glancing again at the footprints. There are prints on the floor, I whispered, her breath caught. Fresh? Yeah. Then listen to me very carefully, she said. Do not, under any circumstances, open that door. I wasn't planning to. Good, she said, because the last person who did... She paused. I don't want a fourth name on the list. My pulse quickened. She still hadn't told me the full story of the former employees, not all of it. But the way she said fourth made my stomach twist. Marlene, I said, my throat tight. Why is this happening to me? Why now? Why is he getting stronger? It's not about you, she said. It's about him. He thinks you're someone who can see him. That's all it takes. I closed my eyes. Why me? There was a long stretch of silence. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Because you remind him of himself. A chill ran through me. I'm nothing like him. He wasn't always what he became, she said. But none of that matters now. What matters is keeping you safe until sunrise. I wanted to ask why sunrise mattered, but I never got the chance. A sharp, metallic clang crashed from the storage room door, like something heavy had slammed into it. I flinched so hard the phone nearly slipped from my hand. What was that? I whispered. Tell me exactly what you're hearing, she said. Another bang rattled the door, harder this time, as if someone inside was pacing again, knocking into shelves or kicking at objects that weren't there. Then the sound shifted. The pacing became quick, frantic. Something scraped across the floor. Then the unmistakable sound of fabric being twisted, squeezed, wrung out with violent urgency. He's doing it again, I whispered. The ringing sound. Marlene didn't speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice shook. I'm on my way. Don't move. The call ended abruptly. I set the phone down, my hands trembling so hard I had to grip the counter edge to steady myself. The sounds in the storage room continued, pacing, ringing, the thud of invisible footsteps. The laundromat seemed to shrink around me, each noise pressing its meaning deeper into my skull. Minutes passed like hours. I stood there, unable to tear my eyes from the door at the end of the hallway. The wet footprints had begun to fade now, evaporating under the harsh fluorescent lights. Like the presence didn't want to leave a trace too long. No evidence, no reminders. At 2:52 a.m., the sounds stopped abruptly. No pacing, no ringing, no scraping, just silence. It wasn't comforting. It was worse. Then, as if responding to some unseen cue, the overhead lights flickered not once, not twice, but 3 times in quick succession. I froze, remembering the rule. Count to 30. But before I could begin, a new sound drifted through the laundromat. A whisper, not close, not behind me like before, but from across the room, from the reflection on the front window. I turned slowly. In the reflection, standing between rows of washers, was the shape of a man, not a solid image, more like a shadow cut from mist, barely darker than the air around him. His head was bowed, shoulders slumped, as if carrying a lifetime of regret. His arms hung loosely at his sides, but his face was hidden in a way that seemed deliberate, as if the building itself refused to reveal it. My breath hitched. He didn't move. He just stood there. Then his head lifted, and I saw the rope burn circling his neck. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. The reflection flickered like a glitch in a video feed, then faded until nothing stood in the row between the machines. But the air was colder now, heavy, charged. I didn't know if I had imagined him, but the ache in my chest told me I hadn't. I backed farther toward the counter and tried again to count to 30. 1, 2, 3. Each number felt heavier. 4, 5, 6. At 15, something shifted in the corner of the room. At 19, the temperature dropped another degree. At 27, I felt breath on the back of my neck again. 30. I spun around, expecting to see him standing behind me, but there was nothing there. Only the empty space between the counter and the dryers. My chest ached with the effort of breathing. Sweat slid down my spine despite the cold. I didn't hear the door open, but suddenly Marlene was beside me, wide-eyed and pale, her face betraying genuine fear for the first time since I'd met her. "Where is he?" she whispered. The question sent a spike of terror through me. She hadn't asked if I had seen him. She asked where. I don't know," I stammered. "In the reflection, near the machines." She moved quickly, scanning the laundromat like she expected him to appear at any second. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Listen to me," she said. "He's manifesting more, stronger. He's trying to communicate with you, and that means he's getting close to breaking out of whatever cycle he's trapped in." "What cycle?" I demanded. "The loop he created the night of the murders," she said. "The guilt, the panic, the washing. It never stopped. It never ended. The motel may be gone, but what happened in that laundry room didn't die with it." She swallowed hard. "He's been trying to finish what he started for 30 years. My confusion deepened. "What did he start?" Her voice cracked. "He tried to wash the evidence, and he failed, over and over. Now he thinks you can help him finish it." "I'm not helping him," I said fiercely. "I'm not getting involved in this." But she only shook her head. "You already are. The moment you saw him, he saw you." A new sound drifted from the hallway. I turned, expecting to hear pacing again. Instead, I heard dripping. Slow, heavy, deliberate, like someone carrying water in cupped hands, letting it fall with intention. Marlene stiffened. "He's here," she whispered. The dripping grew louder, echoing down the hallway. I took a step back. She grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the doorway, her grip frantic. "Don't look at him," she hissed. "Don't acknowledge him." But I couldn't help myself. Something in that hallway called to me, not with fear, but with sorrow. A kind of sorrow that wrapped itself around the heart like a vine, twisting, pulling, begging for recognition. I turned, and he stepped into view. He wasn't translucent this time. He wasn't a reflection. He wasn't a shadow or a shape made of mist. He stood there fully formed, the dripping water falling from his clothes in slow, heavy droplets. His shirt clung to him as if it had never dried in 30 years. His jeans were dark and soaked, his hair matted to his forehead. The rope burns around his neck were raw and red as if freshly made. His face, God, his face, held an agony that no living being could replicate. His eyes met mine, hollow but aware, filled with the kind of exhaustion that comes when guilt becomes a cage with no door. Marlene stepped in front of me, shielding me. Her voice was steady but sharp. "You can't come out here. You know the rules." His head tilted slightly, like a dog hearing a distant whistle. Then he took another step. The fluorescent lights buzzed violently overhead, flickering so hard they stuttered shadows across the walls. He lifted his hand, and he pointed directly at me. The lights died. In the darkness, I felt something brush past my shoulder. A whisper touched my ear like cold wind. "Help me get clean." The lights snapped back on, and he was gone. Marlene grabbed my arms, her voice trembling. "You can't engage with him. You can't answer him. The others did, and it killed them." "But he's not trying to kill me," I said weakly. "He's begging." "That's what makes it dangerous," she said. She backed away, pacing like she needed to burn off panic. "He can mimic emotions, desperation, sorrow, guilt. But none of it is real. He died in a moment of violence so extreme that he's repeating it endlessly. You're not talking to the man he was. You're talking to a loop." I shook my head. "No, he's conscious. He's aware." "That's what they all said." Her voice cracked again. "That's what got them killed." She turned to the machines, her breath unsteady. "He'll try again tomorrow night and the next. You need to keep your distance. The rules are there for a reason." I opened my mouth to argue, but something caught my eye. Something lying on the floor near washer 8. A folded piece of paper. I walked toward it slowly, ignoring Marlene's desperate whisper to stop. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Written across it were 4 words in the same trembling handwriting as before. "Bleach will free me." Marlene grabbed the paper out of my hands and tore it in half, her face burning with panic. "This is what he does," she said fiercely. "He manipulates. He wants you to break the rules. And if you do, he will pull you into that machine and tear you apart like he did the others." I took a step back. "The others tried to help him." "They did more than try," she said. "They poured bleach into the washer." I stared at her. What happened to them? Her voice became a whisper. The machine drowned them. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. The laundromat felt smaller now, more claustrophobic. And for the first time since I started this job, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about him, the presence, the man, the ghost, who had spent 3 decades repeating the same movements, the same mistakes, the same desperate attempt to erase an unforgivable past. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of him. I felt sorry for him. But sorry was dangerous. Marlene was right about that much. The presence wasn't done with me. His footprints had appeared for a reason. The reflection had shown itself for a reason. The whispers in the dark weren't random. He wanted something from me. By the time the final night arrived, I felt like the air inside Lumen Laundry had grown a mind of its own. I had tried pretending everything was still normal. Cleaning lint traps, wiping down tables, doing coin counts with the same routine motion I'd had since my first shift. But nothing was normal now, not after seeing him fully manifested, dripping, pointing at me as if he recognized something I didn't understand. All day I'd told myself I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't step through those sliding glass doors. I wouldn't walk into a building anchored to a dead man's regret. But night has a way of pulling you toward the things you fear most. Maybe it was stubborn curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe the part of me that was tired of running from problems I couldn't escape. Or maybe it was something darker, some magnetic force that tugged at my chest, like invisible fingers. At 11:45 p.m., I found myself unlocking the laundromat door, even though every rational reason not to be there shouted at me to leave. The place was quiet in that eerie way only buildings with a memory can be. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights filled the emptiness, and beyond the rows of washers, the hallway leading to the storage room seemed darker than usual, like the shadows had pooled there and thickened into something close to liquid. Just one more shift, I whispered to myself, and then I'm gone. But deep down, I knew this night wouldn't let me leave so easily. The moment I punched in, I noticed something new, a smell that didn't belong, strong bleach, sharp enough to make my eyes sting. It wasn't normal bleach. This was industrial, burning through the air as if someone had splashed it across the floor. I moved cautiously around the counter, scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. No spills, no open bottles, just the lingering scent of something recently cleaned. I didn't see the note until I turned and nearly stepped on it. A small scrap of paper lying just inside the entrance, folded neatly in half. I crouched down and picked it up, my pulse pounding as I opened it with shaking fingers. Tonight is the last chance. The handwriting was the same trembling script as before. Desperate, uneven, human. For a moment I stood there frozen, the paper fluttering slightly in my hand. I didn't want to believe he could write, that the presence could physically move things around. But the footprints, the reflection, the manifested form, none of it left room for rational doubt. A metallic ping echoed from the far end of the laundromat, pulling my attention. Washer 8's door had closed. It had been wide open when I walked in. Now it was sealed shut with the firmness of something that had made up its mind. My heart pounded harder. I moved toward the machine cautiously, each step feeling like I was crossing a threshold into something I didn't fully understand. When I reached the machine, my breath fogged the glass. Inside, nothing moved. No clothes, no water, just an empty drum, dark and quiet. But as I leaned closer, faint letters slowly began to take shape on the inside of the glass, as if written with the moisture of breath. Bleach. A soft clicking noise came from behind me, the kind a cap makes when twisted loose. I spun around. On the folding table near the dryers sat a large jug of industrial bleach. The safety cap was off. That sharp chemical scent flooded the air again. Someone had placed it there for me. No, he had. A wave of dread washed through me. I remembered Marlene's fear, her insistence that the other employees who tried helping him had died inside the machine. She had described their deaths with a haunted look that told me she had seen things she could never unsee. But something felt different tonight. The presence wasn't trying to manipulate me with shadows or illusions. There was no reaching sleeve from the drum, no hand. Instead, the laundromat felt still, expectant, like it was waiting for me to make a choice. The building itself had been anticipating for decades. I walked toward the front counter and pulled out my phone. My hand shook as I dialed Marlene. It rang once, twice, then her voicemail. Damn it. I hung up and dialed again. Same result. No answer. It was the first time since I started working that she hadn't answered. Even at the strangest hours, she had always picked up. This wasn't an accident. The bleach jug sat on the folding table like a dare. Washer 8 loomed beside it, quiet, too quiet. Part of me wanted to run, to leave this place behind and never look back. Another part of me wanted answers, closure, to free him, to free the building, to free myself from the weight settling in my chest. "You're not real," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. "You're stuck, trapped in some endless nightmare." A light flickered in the corner of my eye. I turned sharply. The hallway lights leading to the storage room dimmed, then brightened twice. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and human-shaped, even though no one stood there. A faint drip echoed again, and then he stepped into view. This time he didn't appear suddenly or flicker like a faulty projection. He emerged slowly, as if the darkness peeled away to reveal him. He was soaked through, every step dripping a trail of water. His clothes clung to his skin, bloodless now, just dark and heavy. The rope burns on his neck were faint, faded, as if time had loosened their hold on him. His eyes, hollow once, glimmered with something dangerously close to hope. He didn't speak, but he lifted his hand and pointed toward Washer 8. My entire body tensed. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic. I expected Marlene's voice in my head, warning me not to cross the line, not to break Rule 7, not to give him what he wanted. But instead, I heard my own thoughts whisper back, "What if this is the only way out?" He took another slow step toward the machine, then paused, dripping water onto the linoleum. The air around him shimmered faintly like heat rising from pavement. His outline blurred at the edges, then sharpened again. He was unstable, flickering between worlds. He pointed again. I stepped closer. The air thickened with tension as I approached the jug of bleach. My fingers brushed the plastic and the presence's posture shifted, the faintest tremor of anticipation, hope, desperation. "Why me?" I asked, the words barely audible. His head tilted slightly. His hand rose to his chest, then lowered to point at the machine again. It was clear he wasn't going to speak, not with words, but his intentions were unmistakable. He wanted to be clean, to wash away the blood he could never scrub from his mind. "Okay," I said softly, surprising myself. "But if I do this, you have to let me go. You have to let all of this go." The presence stilled. He lowered his hand. His face shifted with something I couldn't quite interpret. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or resignation. I didn't wait to understand it. I lifted the bleach jug, feeling its weight in both hands. The safety cap was already loose. I twisted it off fully and set it aside. The chemical smell stabbed at my nose, sharp and burning. Then Washer 8 clicked. It clicked again, and water began filling the drum. The presence backed slowly into the shadows, not disappearing but making space, allowing the machine to begin its cycle uninterrupted. As the water rose, swirling clear at first, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "For 30 years you've been trapped," I whispered. "Let this be enough." I hefted the bleach jug and poured. The thick liquid cascaded into the machine, hit the water with a violent hiss, and immediately steam rose from the drum. The clear water began to shift, turning cloudy, then luminous. The steam thickened, filling the air with a chemical haze that seemed to glow faintly from within. The machine trembled. The metal casing vibrated. The floor beneath my feet shook as if a pulse rippled through it. Then something astonishing happened. The drum illuminated from inside, casting a white-blue light through the glass. Shapes appeared within the light. Not clothes, not stains, but memories. The machine was showing me his past, a motel room, a woman crying, two small children sleeping. The father pacing, wild with panic, clutching blood-soaked clothes, his breath ragged, his hands trembling. And then the laundry room, him shoving the clothes into an ancient washer. Slam, coin, start, repeat, slam, coin, start, the loop, his prison. The light within the drum intensified, and the stains on the clothes inside, stains that weren't even physically present, began to fade. The water brightened, the very air hummed. I glanced sideways and saw him, standing fully beside me, no longer dripping, his outline sharper. He watched the machine with the kind of expression I never expected from a ghost. Peace. The machine churned harder, spinning faster, until the water inside turned brilliantly clear. The light flickered once, then twice, then held steady with a brilliance that made me squint. When the cycle finally stopped, the machine clicked softly. The light faded, the water drained. Inside were two items, a white shirt and a pair of jeans. Clean, crisp, perfectly folded, not a single stain, not a single tear. The presence stepped forward. Something in the room shifted, like a weight lifting from the floor itself. The air warmed, the lights brightened. The oppressive heaviness that had haunted the laundromat since I first stepped inside evaporated like morning fog. He turned toward me. For the first time, his face looked human, not tortured, not hollow, just tired, ready, grateful. He lifted his hand, not pointing, not demanding, offering thanks, and then he smiled. A small, soft, impossibly human smile that held more emotion than any words could have. He began to fade, not abruptly, not violently. His form dissolved like dust carried by a breeze. His edges blurred, then scattered, then softened until the space he once occupied showed only empty air. As he vanished completely, a final whisper brushed the room. "Thank you." The lights steadied. The laundromat felt new, as if 30 years of grief had been scrubbed free. At 3:17 a.m., I sat on the floor, shaking, the bleach jug empty beside me, and for the first time since I started working at Lumen Laundry, I realized I wasn't afraid. I was free. He was free. And the building, this strange, haunted laundromat built atop another man's shame, finally felt like just a laundromat again. In the weeks that followed, nothing strange happened. No flickering lights, no footsteps, no blood, no whispers. The storage room stayed silent. Washer 8 behaved like any other machine. Customers came and went without noticing anything unusual. And I worked my shifts knowing I had done something no one else before me had managed. I had broken the cycle. Sometimes when the machines hum late at night, I think I feel a faint warm breeze at my back, or see the slightest flicker of light near Washer 8. Not a haunting, not a warning, a memory, a reminder that even the heaviest guilt, living or dead, sometimes needs someone willing to show compassion, even when the rules warn against it. I left the job a few months later, not because of fear, but because I felt like my chapter there was done. Lumen Laundry didn't belong to the dead anymore. It belonged to the living again. But every once in a while, when I pass Meadowbrook Avenue, I glance through the glass and see Washer 8 sitting quietly in its row. Just a machine now. And I remember the night I poured bleach into something haunted by a man's final regret and set him free. If you want the next story, another night shift, another haunting, another truth people don't talk about, just let me know. There's more to tell, much more. Some nights after everything ended, I still dream of the laundromat, not the haunted place it once was, but the quiet room it became after his final goodbye. In those dreams, I'm standing alone between the rows of machines, listening to the soft hum of washers turning like a heartbeat that finally found its rhythm. Sometimes I see a faint figure at the far end of the aisle, a silhouette where the shadows fold. He never comes closer, never speaks, never reaches through glass or leaves footprints on the floor. He's just there long enough for me to understand that peace, even for the broken, is possible. People think hauntings are about fear, about cold nights, flickering lights, or things that move when they shouldn't. But that's not the truth. The real hauntings, the ones that stay with you long after the lights come back on, are the memories we try to outrun, the mistakes we scrub and scrub but never feel clean of, the guilt that follows us like a second shadow. He wasn't the monster the newspapers made him out to be. Not to me, not at the end. He was a man who fell apart, then fell into something darker than any ghost story. A man who tried for 3 decades to wash one moment of his life out of existence, and when he finally realized he couldn't do it alone, he asked for help the only way he knew how. And maybe that's what scares me the most. Not the footsteps, not the whispers, not the hand reaching from the drum, but the understanding that sometimes the dead cling to the living because they're afraid to face themselves. I think about him when I see people hurrying through their own storm, people carrying invisible weights, people trying to fix something no one else can see. And I wonder how many of them just need one person who doesn't turn away, one moment of compassion, one chance at being forgiven, even if the only forgiveness they can receive is their own. Maybe the scariest stories aren't about ghosts. Maybe they're about the parts of ourselves we refuse to face. And maybe, just maybe, helping someone else face their darkness is how we find our own way back to the light. So if you ever walk past a quiet place late at night, an empty hallway, a laundromat after closing, a room that feels heavier than it should, listen closely. Sometimes the dead aren't trying to frighten us. Sometimes they're whispering the same thing he whispered to me. Help me get clean, not from blood, not from the past, but from the parts of ourselves we're afraid to admit still haunt us. And if you ever feel that weight, if you ever feel like you're standing alone in your own endless cycle, remember this: even the lost can find peace. Even the broken can be forgiven. And sometimes all it takes to end a haunting is someone willing to believe there's still something worth saving. That night at the laundromat didn't just free him, it freed me too. And maybe that's the real reason the washers hum a little softer now, as if the building itself finally mercifully learned how to rest